Oh,
There we are. And we're live.
Excellent.
Yay.
Thank you. So welcome once again to the Curious Leaders Path. Today we're going to talk about curiosity. And the way that we got to this is, so first of all, Todd Cargis, thank you for joining us as always. And Joanne Stone, of course, thank you so much. It's great to see both of you again. And the way that we got to this topic of curiosity is because it's in the name of this. Yes, exactly. There we go. Thank you. And we realized we hadn't actually really clarified what curiosity means. And there's a lot of assumptions that I think a lot of us have around curiosity, and we thought it would actually be quite valuable to talk about what the benefit of curiosity is, especially in light of the challenges that we're facing. And it could be challenges within our organization, it could be challenges within our families or communities, or it could be the global challenges that we should be focusing on. If we actually want to address any of the things that we have to, I'm going to say fix. I don't know if fix is the right word, but if we want to really address these major challenges and smaller challenges that we have, we've kind of run out of best practices, and now we have to bring in the curiosity element. Yeah, it's not that best practices need to be thrown out the window, but to start with best practices isn't really going to get us to where we need to get to. We need to be a lot more curious about what's actually happening. And then we can figure out when and how should best practices be applied.
Well said. Yes.
Yeah, I like that.
Good.
I like that a lot.
We're living in a VUCA world, so yeah. So that's neat.
So how would you guys define what curiosity is? Let's just start with that really quickly. Did you want to start, or I've got an academic definition?
I always love the academic.
Me too. Let's do that.
So there's a few definitions in academia of what curiosity is, and the one that I like the best is the one that basically doesn't define curiosity as some sort of random activity, but rather a fairly focused one. But it's very directed and very curiosity driven, which is a redundant point, sorry. But it's really a matter of how do we first organize what we currently believe to be true. And I personally, and when I work with my clients, I do that by mapping out how do you actually see the world or your world or the environment that you're working in. And when you look at that, where are there gaps? Where are there things that are anomalies? Where are things that you think are missing in your understanding? And then go out and look for that information, whether you do that through experimentation or exploration or research or whatever, it doesn't matter. But it's this idea of, and most people do curiosity very informally, so they don't necessarily formally map things out and formally go do, identify what the gaps are. They just sort of do it quite naturally. But if we sort of pull it apart and say, what are the actual discrete steps of curiosity? Those are the three that I think are really important. And the important thing is that it's iterative, right? So once we have some new information, wherever we got it from, then we can go back to, so what do we currently believe now? And it makes it much easier for us to start changing what our beliefs are, because it's not that somebody's telling us that we have to change our beliefs or our assumptions or whatever. It's more that we've actually discovered that, hey, there might be a better way of thinking about things. Would you add anything to that? Change that?
Yeah, I think there's this aspect of, I love that you broke it down, because I knew there was a directional aspect of it. Like there's something you're curious about, right? But the one thing I would add is that it's not that I don't know how to kind of, so the current state and then the state that you're going to, there's the gap, right? The gap. I love the gap. So usually it's A to B, and you're curious about how I get from A to B, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes what happens is, though, I get curious about A. Because sometimes, like, I have my own biases, right? And so, I had a conversation today with someone I'm working with, and we're talking about story points. Imagine that, agile person story points, right? And he wanted to make sure every team had the same mechanism for doing the story points. And he has 3 teams that are working together. And I already went to, no, you don't do that. And then I started questioning my why. And then I said, well, hold on a second. Okay, because I had this presumed thinking that was there, right? And I go, okay, hold on, let's drop this. What happens if it's not? And it's like, okay, let's examine. So I started examining A, and I asked him, well, what are you doing with this? And then it went on to something else. And then I could see my own gap. I could see my own biases, and that kind of relaxed. And then it was like, okay, now we're level set. Now we can get to the next thing, right? But yeah, I often, A is where I guess I get stuck. Right. And so I get curious about the A. Right. So anyways, that's sort of like that would be the only thing I would add, is that A is not a given to me. I would always be like, what is A?
Yeah.
What I really love about the definition is that there's an intentionality about it. And I think that intentionality is really important. Yeah, it's funny because I think when I was younger, I would have thought of curiosity as something passive or something benign, like and it's funny because I never would have given very much thought to, curiosity killed the cat, but I understand why.
I take that personally.
Oh, excuse me. That's right. But yeah, it's the intentionality that I think is really, really important about it. It's a choice. It's something that it's something we can do or not do in certain situations. And the other thing that I love about what you added, Joanne, is that it's an opportunity to remove assumptions from whatever situation we happen to be in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, can one of you drop the definition into chat, please? And actually, I'll answer that question. Emily, unfortunately, because of the system that we're using, we can't interact with the LinkedIn chat. But let me see what I can do. Actually, you know what, Kat, if you want to send it over to me, then I can pop over to LinkedIn and I'll drop it in the chat there, if that's possible.
I'm going to make a note to myself. Email definition.
Yeah,
yep.
We'll have to do that afterwards, though, Emily. Sorry about that.
I actually have a blog on it on my LinkedIn profile, but you have to go back in history. It's one of the articles that I wrote, Emily. Okay. So I don't know if that'll help.
Okay.
So given this definition, so why does curiosity matter? And I think we sort of touched on it, but if we can make it a bit more explicit, why does curiosity matter? Why should we talk about curiosity? More importantly,
who wants to go first?
Why should we do curiosity?
Yeah.
I guess we started to talk about like what was so important about having curiosity and everything like that. Like for me, it's all about it's opening up those stuck doors, right? So why it matters so much to me is I let go of that thing I'm fixated on that maybe I can't do anything about, or I'm not really quite sure. But it gives me that freedom. So to be unstuck, to go into that creativity space, right? That space where, there's, I don't know if there's endless possibilities, but there's a lot more possibilities there than in the stuck place that I'm in, right? But I think it matters because that's where the growth is. That's where we grow. That's where companies grow. That's where a lot of people will grow is with that curiosity, right? And I think we talked about it before too, but there's curiosity with ourselves, so curious about who we are. And then there's curious about the things that we do with others, right? Or our connections with others are the things that we do. So, and I think all of it's important for us to kind of like get us like get us unstuck so we can keep moving forward and learn where we want to go next. So that's why I think it's really important and why it matters to me. I don't want to be stuck. I don't know about you guys, but I do not like being stuck.
I agree. And the other thing is when I can apply curiosity to myself, especially in challenging situations, which isn't always easy to do, I'm getting better at it, but it isn't always easy to do. When I can apply curiosity to myself in certain situations, I can start wondering who I'm being in that situation, rather than just sort of going with whatever feels like who I'm supposed to be in that situation. And then I can kind of align that with like, okay, this is who, based on this curiosity, this is who I'm being in this situation. Is that who I want to be? And how would I change it if I wanted to be someone or something else? So it's like all of that stuff, like before I even get to what am I going to do here, it's kind of like, who am I here?
And so it's like what you're saying, Kat, like it's the A to B. Like I see what I am right now, and then and where do I want to go? It's nice.
Yeah. So I like what you guys have said, that it's a lot about growth, growth of the organizations, growth of ourselves personally, and it has to start with ourselves personally. Because if we're not curious, our teams can't be curious, our organizations can't be curious. And I would add, so again, this is coming from research, and I do have a life other than the academic research.
Are you a doctor?
We know she does, by the way.
No, I'm a failed PhD.
We know she does. She's not mine.
I never did finish the PhD, unfortunately, but I do use a lot of the work or research that I did. So
yeah.
So I'm not going to be able to present all of this, and I kind of had developed my own theory of curiosity. So I'm borrowing other people's work. This is not original ideas. I'm just sort of reshaping that help me to remember or to really think about what curiosity, why it matters. So according to research, we can do curiosity either to relieve stress, so if there's a gap, and I think this is a little bit, Joanna, what you're talking about. It's not exactly right. It's if there's a dissonance or something doesn't feel aligned or something really is just getting at us, we can be curious to figure out, how do I relieve the stress of this dissonance? There's also the joyful, and I think this one is actually proven to be more powerful. So the stress reliever is actually very powerful at different times. But if we want to have innovation in teams, we generally want to have joyful stress. And it's not rah party thing. It has to be truly internal joy of, I really want to know this because I think it's going to be, just the exploration process is really fun, right? And there's also, and you guys both touched on this, is that there's reasons for curiosity. Sometimes we're curious in order to get closer to other people. Why do they think that way? Why do they do that? How can we connect better? Whatever. It's very, very socially oriented, and we are social creatures biologically. So it's actually for us to figure out how can we bond better with people, or how can we protect ourselves from threats better? There's also sort of just sheer desire to know. Like if you think about the nerds or the geeks just want to know for the sake of knowing. There's absolutely no purpose for it necessarily, right? And I think all three of us are total geeks or nerds in certain ways, right? So, and again, so it's sort of, I've got sort of this matrix, but the matrix isn't complete. It's either positive motivation, sort of the joyful, just want to know, as well as the stress relief, which is a bit more of a negative motivation, is I want to get away from the bad feeling. And then sometimes it's socially oriented or other sort of biologically driven needs, and other times it's just sheer curiosity. And sometimes that sheer curiosity can be negative of, I don't know and I really should know, or it can be joyful of, I have absolutely no purpose, but I just want to know, right? So when we think about that, that's important, because as we need to solve some of these really big problems that we need to, whether it's inside organizations or, globally or whatever. And I can't help but laugh every time I think about how bad our environment is already, but I'm going to cry if I don't laugh. So I think it's really important from that perspective. But there's another reason that curiosity, and all three of us have touched on this in previous conversations, where if we choose to be curious, it also allows us to reduce some of those very negative emotions. So if we're scared, if we're angry, if we're fearful, scared and fearful, same thing. But if we have these very strong activated emotions, we can choose to respond to the emotions, or we can choose to reframe things so that we can say, I wonder why that's making me so scared, or I wonder why that thing that's making me so scared is happening. And I wonder what our choices are in that situation. So I think there's a range of reasons why curiosity matters so much.
It's, you just brought me back to that thinking of the stress related one where I was again, I was completely frozen when I was having discussions with my ex, right? Like this is before we kind of got divorced, and I was just so scared, like of everything falling apart and the whole thing. And I can remember just standing at the doorstep into the office, and just my body was just overcome with fear. And it was, I had to, that's where the curiosity really clicked in for me. And I can remember it so clearly. It's just like, just sniffing and just getting into something else, where it kind of like shifted me into and out of that mood, because I became so curious. But it was such an overwhelming feeling. The other aspect that I think is really interesting for me is this joyful one that you're talking about. And I'm trying to go, like, what is an example that it was so joyful for me? And I know when I went to the leadership program, for the Coactive Leadership Program, I knew it was going to be great for me. I wasn't really quite sure how it was going to work, but it was the right thing to do. So I was just like so curious as to how it was going to happen. And I get so excited, about that whole thing. But I knew the impact was going to be big, but I wasn't sure what it was. Right. So, so that kind of like reminds me of that blissful kind of like joy. Right. But I'm sure there's more bliss somewhere.
Yeah, I was actually, I was going to ask, like, how is there a connection then between that kind of curiosity and anticipation?
Can you elaborate on that question?
Well, yeah. So you said that, when you went to the leadership program, Joanne, you knew that it was going to be something good. You knew that it was going to be important. And so there's certainty that goes along with that feeling. And part of what we talked about before is how curiosity helps create certainty when there's uncertainty, or when there's just assumptions, right? Or helps us, maybe more precisely, it sort of helps us be less uncomfortable with uncertainty.
Right.
So what I'm wondering is, if you have the certainty that that it's going to be good, and you just don't know how it's going to be good, where does curiosity begin and anticipation end, or vice versa?
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I guess it's the whole aspect of, I just don't know what's going to happen next. So I'm always curious, like when, we get to the next call, or we go to the next retreat, or we did whatever it was. I was very curious of how it will unfold, and how it was going to impact me. But I was excited because a friend of ours, Mike Edwards, he already went through it. And I knew others that also went through it, and the results were absolutely tremendous. Like, it was mind-boggling, the shift. So I guess, yeah, so there's this anticipation, but there's also this excitement. Like, I was so excited about going and doing something different to kind of like help free me, whatever the case may be, and grow me, the whole thing. And so I think there was this anticipation that was there. How might this happen? How does this work? Like, so that's I think that's where it sort of came into more for me. Yeah.
That's really neat. What comes up for you, Kat?
So I am obnoxiously curious. I think I never left my 2-year-old state. And it served me really well in many, many ways. So I've lived in 6 different countries, 3 different continents, lived in different parts of Canada, been in lots of different environments, worked with in a range of industries, not in a range of industries, but worked with a range of companies that are in different industries. And I think all of these life experiences that I've had that have been unbelievably rewarding, and where I've often made a really significant impact, is because of my curiosity. But I also have very negative experiences with curiosity as well, because I don't always know when to tamp it down, or to sort of reduce it. And it's you know, I think there's times and places to use curiosity, but because it's such a natural default state for me, I don't always pick up when other people aren't curious. I usually can pick up when it's not appropriate to be curious, but I don't always pick up when other people are not open to curiosity. And a lot of times these are people who have power over me, and that doesn't work well.
Well,
So I've had both. I've had both positive and negative experiences, but mostly positive, fortunately.
mm,
What about
yeah.
you?
Well, when you were saying that, it reminded me of it's. Oh, I'm going to tell a short story, and it's really short. But I was at. I'm not going to say where. I was working at a company, and was it my? I don't remember if it was my boss, the executive, or his boss, the senior executive, who said something to me that it got under my skin. And I remember looking at him and saying, I'm so curious why you think it's okay to speak to me that way. Didn't last long.
Kudos
I
to
had
you.
a VP like that too. You never ask him why. You never do. And you get shut down as soon as you ask him why. It was incredible.
Mhm.
I would have lasted 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, that was about right for me too.
And
there's a
good
curiosity here. Like I think you go ahead, you ask the why, right?
Mhm.
And I'm a sure, Kat, when you're in your travels, you ask the why, and then it's through that there is the aspect of the kickback, right? Or the you shouldn't do it. Like you won't know until you ask, until you get
Yeah.
into that curiosity, right? So you're still curious, although the impact of that curiosity can be a negative or a positive one, right?
Yeah.
And then you can go, okay, what do I want to do next, right? So this is where our sense making skill starts to come up, and I think when you're talking about it, Kat, it just reminds me of just to be adaptable, right? To connect with others, to like, you're in a foreign country, you're sitting on, probably I would say uncertain areas all the time, unsure where it's going to go to, but the curiosity is offered the adaptability and the flexibility and all that stuff to you to allow you to kind of like, figure out what you need to do next or sense what you need to do next, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Cool.
Oh, and Emily's got a great question. Do you think it's threatening or perceived as disrespectful
From a
from a
fellow
fellow
2-year-old.
2-year-old? Thank you for that, Emily.
I think it depends on the person, so one of the things that we definitely need to talk about is when should we use curiosity and when not. And I would say there's a whole bunch of parameters, but maybe what we can do is sort of elaborate on that a little bit. But just to answer Emily's question, I think a lot of it is that we really have to think about who are we speaking to, what's the context that we're speaking to them in, what's the timing, what's the purpose of what we need to achieve. And sometimes it can legitimately be threatening. Sometimes it can legitimately be disrespectful. And other times it's just that some people can't handle questions for one, either because their belief system is, I'm the leader, you should follow. Sometimes it's because people believe that they need to have answers. And if you ask a question they can't answer, they feel threatened. Right. So I think it's really a matter of understanding who and when we're talking to people.
But who's being threatened? Who's being disrespectful? Yeah. So if I was going into the way that I feel now, if I walked into an office to a VP and asked them, why did you talk to me that way? And then they got mad, then I would say, you're being disrespectful to me. Right. If this was my 25-year-old self, right, and I went into the VP's office and they said that to me, I would be like, I would feel threatened, right? Like I would just feel the opposite. And I think it may have to do with the maturity of the person, right? Because there's a status thing with that, right? When you feel threatened, that means that person has a status over you, right?
Yeah.
If it's disrespectful, right, then that I have the status over them, right, type of thing, right? Or maybe disrespectful doesn't have to be status over, but it feels more equal. I'm hoping it's more equal. But I just, that's what I see when I hear the threatening.
It's funny because I wonder, Joanne, if there's an opportunity to look at agile practice.
Yeah.
as a bit of an example here, right? And what I'm thinking of is, so if I use the example that I just offered, right, where I was talking to the senior person and I said, I don't understand why you think it's okay to talk to me like that, or whatever it was. If I had it to do all over again,
Yeah.
I think that the pre-question that I would have asked would have been, what's important to me right now in this moment?
Mhm.
In the same sort of way that, you know, at the beginning of the day or sprint or whatever, right? The agile team gets together and says, what's the most important thing for us to focus our attention on right now? And I think that a lot of us, myself included, kind of make an assumption that we know what the most important thing is. And when the question is explicit, then you kind of have to just take a beat and go, okay, wait a minute, what's actually important here? And I probably would have made a different decision because, you know, saying to this individual in a room full of people, I don't understand, or help me understand why you think it's okay to do what you just did.
Oh, not within a no. Yeah, like
Isn't right? You
yeah,
know.
not between two people in a room, but
Mhm.
if it was a sidebar conversation, it would have been different. But in front of a whole group of people, that, you know, I mean,
No, someone was disrespectful to me in a group of people, and I decided to be curious and ask why he thought that was okay.
yeah,
But there's more gentle ways as well. You know,
Mhm.
if somebody's
Oh, I agree.
disrespecting you publicly, then you, in theory, depending on power, who's got power,
Mhm.
what the environment is, there's a range of things.
Mhm.
But assuming that it was a bunch of coworkers together, and maybe it was your boss speaking disrespectfully to you,
Mhm.
or somebody who had a senior position to you,
Mhm.
but they did it publicly in front of other people you work with, where you need their respect, right?
Mhm.
Then I think it's totally appropriate for you to push back, but maybe there could have been a softer way to do it, right? And to say, you know, and first of all, I think where curiosity fits into this is be curious about what are your own needs. Are you
Mhm.
reacting,
yeah,
or are you being proactive to
Yep.
regain your power?
Yeah.
And if the answer is I'm being proactive, if it's first I'm being reactive and I'm angry,
Mhm.
then maybe it's okay. Now I need to stop
Mhm.
for a beat,
Mhm.
and then I can ask the question once I'm ready to really
Mhm.
regain my power.
Mhm.
And then maybe what you want to say is, you know, do an I statement and say, you know, what I just heard you say is this, and here's how it made me feel. Did I interpret that correctly? And I'm just curious about it because I want to make sure that we're communicating effectively,
Mhm.
right? So I think there's ways. I don't think what you said was, the context of what you said was not inappropriate, perhaps. And just for the record, I've got a long track record of things
Sure.
where, oh boy, I wish I could go back and redo it. You know, but I'm curious if maybe the way you had asked might have been different.
Perhaps. Well, and I think it's interesting because, you know, when I filter it through the curiosity filter, like what was important to me at that moment,
Yeah.
I suspect that if I had asked that question, like I know I just said maybe I would have done something else, but as I'm thinking about it, I think if I'd asked that question, what's important to me right now in this moment, I don't think I would have changed anything.
Mm.
And that's a possibility too. It's just kind of like what I wasn't aware of in that moment was how my response or how my reaction might land and what I might get from it.
Mhm.
And if I had sort of applied that just little bit of curiosity, like even for half a second,
Mhm.
right? Like, what do I want? What do I want right now out of this?
And also being curious about how he's going to respond. You know, in this case, it was a man,
Hmm.
but you know, whoever you're speaking to,
Of course.
you know,
Yeah.
because you have to know their personality and get a sense of, is
Yep.
this someone who feels they need to protect their identity at any cost?
Right.
Or is this someone who actually wants to build relationships?
Hmm.
You know, and once you sort of use your curiosity to think about, what do I need,
Hmm.
and what does this other person need? And I'm curious how we can reestablish respect
Yeah.
in front of the team, because he just disrespected me in front of the team. So now we
Hmm.
need to reestablish
Yep.
that's not appropriate, right?
Yeah. I understand. I understand. And what I'd add is that in that situation, and I didn't mean for this to be the example because I know that we've got some other ones as well, but you know,
yeah,
in that situation, um, I think I can apply curiosity to myself, and I can know my motivations, and I can know what I expect and where I want to go from it, and what's important to me from an outcome perspective.
Mm.
What I can't apply curiosity to and have certainty is what's important to him without asking him. I mean, I could say, oh, that's interesting. What's important to you in this moment, in this situation?
Well, that's not necessarily a bad question, right?
Yeah.
Like and you preface it and say, here's why I'm asking you this question, right? And what do you think is the most important for us to move with the purpose, for us to move forward and be able to work together effectively, or maybe something a little bit different, but something along those lines. But I think where the curiosity is so powerful is first reflecting on your own needs, because that allows you to clarify a lot about what's actually going on. Am I just reacting out of anger, or am I reacting because I'm concerned that I'm going to be disrespected or lose status with my team? Or am I really just thinking this is totally inappropriate, especially in our work culture, and I'd like to put a stop to it? Or is it we have a work culture that needs to be fixed, and this is just perpetuating the work culture that's not working, right? So the more that you can become curious about what's really going on inside me, the more clear you can be about what you need. And then the more curious you can be, not just in the moment, but even ahead of time. So I'm assuming you said it was a VP, I think. And
I think so.
Yeah,
it was a while ago.
Theoretically, you would have had theoretically, and probably some memory is happily gone. But if you think about also being curious just about people as you get to know them, because you probably would have had some interactions with this person over time. So if you're curious in each interaction, what's motivating this person? What's really important to them? What's their job description? What are they being measured on? What's really motivating them, and how do they? Yeah, what's motivating them, I think, is a really good question, right? So it's curiosity, not just in the situation, but ideally curiosity that sort of laid the groundwork so that when you get into this, I'm going to call it a crisis situation, you already have a lot of ammunition, and then you can be curious about what's actually happening in this moment.
What I'm hearing is curiosity as a tool for conflict resolution. I'm sorry I cut you off, Joanne, but
yeah,
it just popped into my head.
But Diane Michelle Hamilton, who's just an amazing negotiator, contract negotiator, I think one of the top negotiators in the court system in the US, I think. But she just did some fantastic stuff. And when she mediated conversations between two people and all that stuff, like there are certain situations where she would walk away because it was like there is a hard boundary somewhere, right? Like where it becomes unacceptable to have that disrespect of yourself, right? And so what comes up for me is that there's a certain part of yourself that needs to be honored, I guess. But does it need to be, I mean, you can honor it yourself, but you may have to be curious about whether or not that other person will honor it, may never honor it itself, because there is some narcissistic leaders who may not do that at all, right? And so, and it's not, then it's not really worth the conversation, because how the conversation is going to happen. And you have to make a choice as to, like, these are the situations I do not like to be in, right? And that's what I'm going to do next. So, so sorry, that's what was coming up for me. Like there's a part of us, right? But there was some really great books. I think difficult conversations, right? Negotiating to Yes. Both of them are really great books in terms of the same thing that you were saying, Kat. In terms of like, this is what I heard, this is how I feel, this is how it made me feel, like this is where we want to go, right? Like there's like step-by-step steps to kind of take us through a conflict. But the curiosity aspect of all this, to me, also comes back to ourselves. And like for me, what comes up for me is if you come in feeling like you need to defend yourself, then they're going to use it too. Right. So, and a part of what they're saying they were doing because they thought they were right. So we've got people who are coming in with both the right feeling
Mhm.
I didn't do anything wrong.
Mhm.
Otherwise I wouldn't
Yep.
do it, right? So,
Yep.
and you so to me, there's this aspect of that which is needs to be looked at and respected as well.
Mhm.
And if we come in there with this openness, this curiosity, this openness, this willingness to kind of work it through and see what evolves and let go of things that may not be where we want it to be,
Mm.
and be like, it's almost like you're doing an innovation. I don't know what's
Oh.
going to come out of this, right? Conversation. All right. But I'm going to come in with a clean slate. This is what it
Mhm.
is. I'm going to let go of all my assumptions, my biases. I don't
Mhm.
know what happened. I'm really curious. Right. And, if I was to have this is what I heard, but I'm just really curious, like, what can we design,
Mhm.
right? Sort of to, in
Mhm.
a future state. Right. So, yeah. Anyways, that's what
No,
was.
I agree. I think that makes an awful lot of sense.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, if you were to sum up, when is it good to use curiosity? When is it good not to use curiosity? What are some key guidelines that you would come up with?
Yeah, this whole discussion about the not to. Um, I
So I can highlight some of the things that you've said.
Sure.
If you and
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
agree with them totally. Is we have to think about the personalities of the people that we're speaking with,
Mhm.
right? Because if we're talking about narcissists, they're not going to change. And curiosity is intended for us to uncover things for ourselves, and then ideally to help other people uncover things for themselves, and then for us to uncover things collectively. But
Mhm.
if the person that we're dealing with is not curious, is not open to curiosity, either because they feel threatened by it, or because they think it's disrespectful, or because they're narcissists, then there's no point in using curiosity. If they don't have the competencies of curiosity, and there are competencies of it, right? And that can result in feeling threatened or feeling
Mhm.
disrespected. So if they don't have the competency to be really curious or to really dig down and truly get really down into the mud to figure out how do we answer this,
Mhm.
it's still about reading the person and knowing when do I stop. So
Mhm.
maybe I've decided it's worth starting, but when do I stop? I don't have that, but that's in
Mm.
theory what I should be developing. um, and then there's other contexts as well. I think power, we always have to think about who's got power. Um, in this environment, how is power won? How is power lost? We always have to think about that. Are there other things that you would add?
Well, I guess the one thing that when I don't use curiosity, is when I have someone who's driving a speedboat across the ocean, and I don't need to be curious as to whether or not he knows how to drive the boat.
Mhm.
And the waves are like 9 feet or 10 feet, right? And you're just like, you just know he's gonna make it.
Well,
I'm
you
not
hope.
how he does it.
You
He's doing
hope. Yeah. Todd, anything you would add? Any other times where we should or should not use curiosity?
It's so interesting to me because it's challenging for me to come up with the moments where we don't, or where it wouldn't be useful, because they are few and far between.
Mhm.
And and before the call we were chatting about this, and one of the examples that came up is, once the surgical team is in the operating room and they know what the plan is, that's not the time to be curious or to say, hey, maybe it would be better if we made the incision here instead over here, or whatever, right? And again, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not exactly sure how that stuff works, but I have to assume that they plan stuff in advance and then they debrief afterwards. But in the moment, that's probably not the time for that kind of curiosity. But what comes up for me when I think of that is, well, what kind of curiosity is it okay for in the moment? Because a surgery can go wrong. The speedboat going across the ocean could develop I don't know, a weird clunking sound, and in the absence of curiosity, how will we pivot and adjust to those rapidly changing situations?
There's times when you can turn it off and just kind of just do the steps, right?
Yeah, just do the thing.
just turn it to completely off. Just,
Yeah.
like, and I guess the part where a curiosity sometimes stops for me is when I'm actually meditating.
Oh.
Yeah, because in meditating, I just want to. I'm just what I'm doing. What's called sit, right? So I just sit, and you let go of everything.
Mm.
And so you try not to kind of like get your mind curious about all these, how can I do this, how can I do that? Like even when you sleep, you're trying to sleep and you're really curious before you're not going to sleep because your mind's going, right? So so for me, I don't apply curiosity at certain points in time when I want to totally be empty, right? An empty, I'll call it an empty vessel, right? Because when I become empty, sometimes that's when things will come to me, right? It's because I'm not looking for it, I'm not curious for it, I'm not whatever. So that's when I don't. That's when some of these things will come up for me when I am totally blank, and that's when I don't use curiosity. Yeah,
That's fascinating, Joanne. I actually, it's funny because I understand what you're saying, but I think I would have described meditation as a state of heightened curiosity. Because you're right. Like, I'm unattached to what shows up, but once it does, well, isn't that interesting?
yeah,
Huh.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
in terms of knowing that curiosity isn't always the right thing, but in some situations it really is, and we need to figure out how to use it effectively. So sometimes we have to be very direct, sometimes indirect, sometimes very soft, sometimes very not forceful necessarily, but direct. Let's go back to that word. How do we learn to use curiosity? How do we foster our curiosity? And let's talk about it in terms of ourselves individually, because we can't have curious teams, we can't have curious organizations unless we're personally very comfortable with curiosity. So what's required to foster curiosity?
As a leader?
What's that?
Well, all of us are leaders in some way. So let's talk about it in the professional context, but it is kind of a personal skill set, right? So however you would like to answer it.
I've got a fast answer, and let's see how it lands. Because if I think of the times that I've had, sort of formal leadership responsibilities within the context of an organization, fostering curiosity on the teams that I've led has always been important. Although I don't know that I would have necessarily described it that way a couple of years ago, but it's always been important. And the way that I've done it, and if there's anyone who's been on one of my teams who's listening to this, then I'm very interested to be challenged by this, or tell me I'm right or wrong, right? But keep me honest. I think that the way to foster it is by expressing that curiosity about the members of your team.
Yeah.
Like I can't possibly expect them to be interested in what's important to me if I'm not at all interested in what's important to them.
It's a good place to start.
Yeah.
Deep conversations, and curious about how they work, how they tick, what their aspirations are, what inspires them.
Yeah. Well, but actually, Joanne, it could be more basic than that too, right? Like it's just within the context of the job, right? What's important to you about this job right now, the way that it's happening, the way that it's like, it doesn't even have to be what makes you tick, what's the most important thing to you in your life. It can be more surface level than that, and that other stuff will come eventually. Sorry, I interrupted you. That was rude. I apologize.
No. I guess the question I know is we foster it within ourselves and foster it within teams, right? We foster it internally, externally, and I was just, wondering, well, how do I foster curiosity within myself? And certainly the stuck points in me is when I get stuck, I get curious, right? So what's in it? why is it here? Like what's come up? And I will, it's almost like I do the, but why, like I'll do things to kind of like, write things down to kind of understand where it came from and, what perhaps was the background of that and why that actually happened. So I will go into almost like a processing kind of state in a way, but I try not to go too deep, because we can think too much sometimes, right? And so then what I start to happen is from a curiosity perspective, I'm also curious about what is the rest of like how my body actually feels, right?
Mm.
Curious about, the things that like it's a mind, body, spirit type of thing, right? Like I am trying to kind of like, okay, well, like from a spirit perspective, from my spirit perspective, what would that be? Like, okay, just sit, meditate, bing, or walk or do something else. So, but I have like all these different types of techniques of either I'll go journal when I'm stuck, or I have a coach, right, that coaches me, and I'll get curious as to why is it that I keep going to the same pattern all the time. We talked about patterns in the past. Why is it that I like this pattern of drama queen or whatever it is, right? And it's like, oh, that's interesting, right? And so, and then having the other person ask me questions, right? So that I can kind of like figure out exactly what it is. And he gets curious. Ooh, you did that thing with your voice again, Ooh, I did, So actually having the other person is really helpful too, to kind of get that, curious about oneself and then try and figure out how to kind of shift yourself out of this.
Can I just want to sort of bring us back to something that you said at the beginning, Joanne. And I think it's really, really important. And it's one of those moments when I wish I could put something in the chat, because I think that this actually belongs in perpetuity. You said, when I get stuck, I get curious. Yes. And I think that's so powerful.
Yes.
Because we all get stuck.
Oh yeah.
We all get stuck.
My daughter has just popped in.
Oh, cool. She's curious.
Yeah. And then
the curious about what you're doing.
The dog's in. Everyone's in.
Everyone's here.
So the way that I would say that we need to foster curiosity is being curious about our curiosity. And it's sort of, I'm kind of repeating what you're saying, Joanne, but it's, we need to really, a lot of people resist curiosity because they're uncomfortable with uncertainty. And then we need to get curious about, why are we uncomfortable with uncertainty? Why do we feel like we need to know the answers? Why do we feel like if somebody asks a question and we don't know the answer, we're either wrong or not qualified, or what, we just have negative judgments. So be curious about that. If you, be curious about how can you ask better questions. And there's a skill set in there, but there's also a matter of permissioning. And this goes back to what we talked about, was it 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago? Give yourself permission just to be curious and just to muddle around and not necessarily ask good questions, because over time, as you learn to be curious, you'll also learn to ask better questions. Because that kind of goes back to this idea of first understand what you believe to be true, then figure out where the gaps are, or where, there's anomalies or sort of something that just sort of seems kind of interesting or fun or different or whatever. And then go seek information to see if you can fill in some of those gaps. And then you redo your map and say, now how do I see this landscape, or what do I believe to be true? And once you develop that skill set of being curious, that's where you can start asking better questions. And what I find really interesting is the guys that I've worked with some people that are, really serious investors in early stage companies, and a range of other people as well. But when I watched these guys who were angel investors, and they were seeing pitch after pitch after pitch from companies, often very technical. I mean, ideally the pitches are not too technical, but it was technical information or technical companies. And they were able to absorb this information so quickly and make sense of it, and then ask really good questions. And I think the reason they were able to do that so effectively and absorb such a range of information so quickly is because they were genuinely very curious, and they learned this art of organizing information as soon as they got it,
Mm-hmm.
then recognizing where they had gaps in their knowledge or gaps in what they were being told or whatever. And then they were able to ask good questions. So I think, that's another skill set that we need to develop of how do we organize our thinking, building mental frameworks or whatever it is. The more that we can do that, and the more, excuse me, the more curious we are about how we can do that, I think the better we get at it, and therefore we then can ask better questions as well, right? So it's really, I think, to become curious, the more curious we can become about our own curiosity, including when does it work, when does it not work, et cetera. I think that's actually how we really develop really powerful and relevant and meaningful curiosity.
I love that. I also, there was something that was there that really triggered this thought in terms of, I can spend a huge amount of time in my head. Why did I do this? Why did I do that? I need to do that. Yeah. Like, okay, I got to make this decision. How are you going to prioritize your work? Like, it's almost like it's a way to keep my mind busy.
Yeah.
Doing things, and then from actually doing the things that I really need to do.
Yeah.
Right. And I expect some of the investors that you're talking about. Sorry, did I cut you off?
No, I cut you off. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, I expect that there's certain people that if they have that clarity of mind, right, where they're not necessarily questioning themselves or second guessing themselves. And I'm not sure if I call that curiosity. It just maybe it's not curiosity, but it's just me thinking in my head. But it's this aspect of if the more that you can clear that off, you're able to do these other things.
So what you described, where you just constantly ask yourself questions and judging yourself a lot of times, that to me is rumination. That's not curiosity, right? That's just beating yourself up or whatever, we got lots of words for it. Yeah. But I think what makes it curiosity is when we organize it, right? And that's when it becomes valuable. And that's when being in your head is not necessarily a bad thing. If it's rumination, it's useless, right? It's a signal that something's not aligned, something's not right, and we should be curious about that and then dig down on it. But if we're just ruminating, it's a waste of energy.
And how do you tell the difference?
Organized. Yeah. So my statement, when I have friends or clients or whatever complain about something, my response always is, you can talk to me about the same topic over and over and over again. I will listen, whether it's a friend or a coach or a facilitator, whatever. If I hear the same story again, I'm not going to listen to it. But if you tell me the same story in a different way, that shows me that you've processed information. That shows me you've been asking questions. That shows me you've been looking for more information. I will listen to you until the ends of the earth, right? But if you just tell me the same story in the same way over and over again, it tells me that you're not doing any work and I'm not interested.
Yeah, I think I like that, because with the rumination, there's a narrative.
Yeah.
Right? There's a narrative that I'm telling myself, because it's I'm not good enough, I don't deserve to be treated that way, or whatever it is, right? There's some narrative.
No growth. There's no growth in it. To go back to what you guys were saying at the beginning. Exactly.
And I think what I might add to organization is that the curiosity is also a little, and this is going to sound weird because we're talking about being curious about the self, but there is also a depersonalization that goes along with that curiosity. Like, I kind of have to be able to step outside of how I'm feeling and, just either feel it or wonder why I'm feeling it or wonder what it is. And there's there's curiosity seems to disempower some of that. Like, it's disarming to the rumination. It's disarming to our saboteurs, if you will.
It's disarming to our saboteurs, and it's empowering to ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any last thoughts as we get close to the end here? I think those are some really good points, Todd.
Thank you.
No, I that was just brilliant. I'm done. Drop the mic. You just said it. Now it's like there's a total different, like, I mean, hey, rumination versus,
Yeah.
curiosity, right?
Well,
What a great distinction. How can you shift from rumination to
for
curiosity?
for sure. And I think, that's the thing that for me was a really, really big deal, and realizing, when what I'm doing is productive and what I'm doing isn't. And the difference is, curiosity. I learn something when I'm being curious. I don't learn anything when I'm ruminating. I just reinforce my limiting beliefs.
Yep.
Nice.
Yeah.
I don't learn anything when I'm ruminating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No growth when ruminating. Nice.
Exactly.
Okay.
Huh. That's a good conversation.
Thanks again to both of you. I really appreciate that. I found that very interesting. Hopefully
Me too.
all our listeners did as well, and hopefully both of you
Yeah.
did as well. So
Absolutely. Oh, and thank you for keeping us on track, Kat.
oh, you're welcome. It was a fun conversation. Thank you.
It really was. It was. All right. Okay. So I'm going to end the broadcast. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.